The Horus Heresy. I'm gonna cover the most notable events of the heresy, and hopefully all of us will get a better understanding of just what happened. So let's do this. When the great warp storms that had cut off Terra since the end of the dark age of technology subsided, and with the end of the age of strife, the Emperor of Mankind thought it's time to begin his Great Crusade, a massive campaign to conquer the galaxy and reunite the human race under the single banner of the new Imperium of Man. To execute this plan, the Emperor created the primarchs, genetically engineered superhumans created from his DNA. When the primarchs were still infants, the Chaos Gods, Tzeentch, Nurgle, Khorne, and Slaanesh feared that through the primarchs, the Emperor would impose his power across the galaxy and weaken the grip on the minds of humanity, which was the source of both their existence and the growth in their power within the Immaterium. So they snatched them away from the genetic laboratory on Terra. They opened a portal from the warp and broke into the laboratory, unable to destroy the primarchs outright. Because of the protections the Emperor had laid upon them, the Chaos Gods scattered them across the galaxy through the warp. Each primarch was cast ashore on an inhabited human world, and during the course of the Great Crusade, the Emperor encountered each of the primarchs on their scattered homeworlds in turn. To fill the gap in his military plans for the Great Crusade, wrought by the primarchs' absence after they had been stolen away, the Emperor had instead created 20 Space Marine legions, several of which, such as the First Legion, had been raised even as the Unification's wars still raged. The Emperor used the primarchs' individual genetic material still on his position to craft the genetically enhanced legions astartes, creating 19 gene seed organs that could be implanted within a human male to transform him into a Space Marine. After the Emperor rediscovered his sons scattered across the galaxy, he made each primarch the master of the legion with his DNA. However, this would be a critical mistake, as the creation process of a Space Marine made them feel more loyalty for their primarch than the Emperor, especially those recruited from their primarch's homeworlds rather than from Terra before the primarch's rediscovery. The triumph of Ullanor. The Ullanor Crusade, with a vast assault on the Orc Empire of the Overlord Orlak during the late 30th millennium. Ullanor was the capital world of a green-skin empire. The crusade included the deployment of 100,000 Space Marines, 8 million Imperial Army troops, and thousands of Imperial starships. This was the largest concentration of Orcs ever defeated by the Imperium of Man before the Third War for Armageddon, which began during the 41st millennium. At the triumph of Ullanor, a full 14 of the Space Marine legions stood represented, and with them came 9 primarchs of the greatest armies ever created by human hands: Mortarion, the Reaper of Men and Master of the Death God; Fulgrim, leader of the Emperor's Children; Magnus the Red, the Crimson King, the Lord of the Thousand Suns; Logar Aurelian, the quiet and brooding zealot of the Word Bearers; Angron, the Gladiator Lord and Son of Grief, of the World Eaters; Rogaldorn, the stalwart man of stone, Primarch of the Imperial Fists; Jagatai Khan of the White Scars Legion. Then came Sanguinius of the Blood Angels, his mighty wings folded back across his battle plate. And finally came Horus of the Lunar Wolves, the hero of Ullanor, liberator and first among equals. You're like a sun, and together we have all but conquered the galaxy. Now the time has come for me to retire to Terra. My work as a soldier is done, and now passes to you, for I have great tasks to perform in my earthly sanctum. I name you War Master. And the Lunar Wolves were renamed the Sons of Horus in his honor. Beginning of the corruption. The Primarch Logar of the Word Bearers Legion was a religious zealot who was said to have experienced visions that foresaw the coming of the Emperor and believed him to be a living god. And he started worshipping the Emperor on his homeworld of Colchis. When the Emperor arrived to reclaim his lost son, he found that all of Colchis was worshipping him, but did not approve of this, and saw it as a violation of the imperial truth, which is that science, reason, and logic alone presented the tools required to create a better human future. With their refusal to stop worshipping the Emperor, he then ordered a task force composed of the Ultramarines Legion and led by their primarch Robert Guilliman and accompanied by a force of his elite personal bodyguards, the Legio Custodes, to raise the capital city of planet Kur, a world dear to the word bearers, who considered its capital Monarchia the perfect city. Logar felt betrayed by the Emperor, and two of his advisors offered to worship gods truly and proposed a pilgrimage to what now known as the Eye of Terror, the largest web storm in the galaxy. Logar was tasked by the Chaos Gods to turn all the Space Marine legions, beginning with Horus. It was on the moon of the world of Davin that Horus's fate was sealed. During a battle against chaos-spawned undead, Horus was poisoned by a Xenos blade dedicated to Nurgle, known as a Chemprach Anathami. Using a dark ritual to try to heal him, Horus's spirit was transferred from his body into the Immaterium. Magnus the Red, the sorceress primarch of the Thousand Sons Legion, had also traveled into the war via sorcery to try and stop Horus from turning to chaos, to find that the dark gods healed his grievous wound and filled him with the powers of the warp. Horus led his legion and sought to turn many of his fellow primarchs to the service of chaos, and succeeded with Angron of the World Eaters, Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children, and Mortarion of the Death Guard, who were the first of many to follow, along with many regiments of the Imperial Army and several Titan legions of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The Isstvan III Atrocity. The Imperial Planetary Governor of Isstvan III, Vardus Pral, had been corrupted by the Chaos God Slanesh. Pral had declared his independence from the Imperium and practiced forbidden sorcery, so the Council of Terra charged Horus with the retaking of that world and its capital city, the Coral City. Although the four legions under his command, the Sons of Horus, the World Eaters, the Death God, and the Emperor's Children had turned to chaos, there were still some loyalists within each of these legions that approximated 1/3 of each force. Many of them were Terran-born Space Marine, recruited into the Astartes legions by the Emperor himself before the rediscovery of the primarchs during the Great Crusade. Horus had a plan to get rid of the loyalists in the four legions. He dispatched all of the known loyalists to the service of Isstvan III, and the orbital fleet launched virus bombs. But one of the captains of the Emperor's Children, with help from another captain of the Death Guard who was in command of the Death Guard frigate Eisenstein, managed to reach the service of Isstvan III and warn the loyalist Space Marines. They took shelter before the virus bombs struck. 8 billion civilians of Isstvan III died almost at once, as the lethal flesh-dissolving virus called the Life Eater infected every living thing on the planet. The psychic shock of so many deaths at one time shrieked through the warp, briefly obscuring even the Astronomicon. The Primarch of the World Eaters, Angron, flew into a rage and hurled himself at the planet with 50 companies of the traitor Marines, and reinforced by the remaining 3 legions. Fortunately, a contingent of loyalists escaped Isstvan III aboard the damaged Imperial frigate Eisenstein, fled to Terra to warn the Emperor that Horus had turned traitor. Some of the loyalists were still on the service of the planet and fought bravely, delaying Horus for 3 months, until only a few hundred were left. Tired of the conflict, Horus ordered his men to withdraw and then had the remains of the Coral City bombarded into dust for a final time from orbit. 70 loyalists of the Death Guard Legion were aboard the frigate Eisenstein, who met with the Primarch Rogaldorn of the Imperial Fists and presented proof of what happened on Isstvan III, and they set a course for Terra. Preparations. Horus succeeded in swaying Angron and Mortarion of the World Eaters and Death Guard to chaos because of their own various personal grudges against the Emperor. Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children by the promise of power and personal perfection that the Chaos Gods, especially Slanesh, offered to him and his vain Astartes. Logar of the Word Bearers had been responsible for Horus's own corruption. The Imperial Fists and White Scars were too close to Terra to be contacted without raising suspicion, though Horus believed that the White Scars Primarch Jagatai Khan would ultimately take his side. Fulgrim also attempted to sway his friend Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands to Horus's cause. this attempt failed, and Fulgrim barely escaped with his life. Three of the most loyal legions who could not be swayed to the side of chaos, the Dark Angels, Blood Angels, and Ultramarines, and their primarchs Lionel Johnson, Sanguinius, and Rupert Gilliman, were sent on missions by the War Master far from Terra and the Isstvan system. The Blood Angels were sent to the demon-infested Cygnus cluster, and the Ultramarines to the world of Calth. Of the other traitor primarchs, Konrad Curze, the Night Haunter, was due to face disciplinary action from the Emperor, which he did not believe he deserved. The Alpha Legion Primarch Alfarius had always been closer to his brother Horus than to his father the Emperor, and the Iron Warriors Primarch Bertrabo's open and bitter rivalry with Rogal Dorn of the Imperial Fists, and his feeling that he and his legion were handed the worst tasks in the Great Crusade, for which they never received the recognition they believed they deserved, made him an easy target for corruption. The Thousand Sons had never planned to join Horus. The path Tzeentch had mapped for that legion and the psychic Primarch Magnus the Red ultimately led them to chaos regardless. Unfortunately, the Space Wolves' unexpected assault on the Thousand Sons' homeworld, which was actually a plot by Horus, a brutal campaign remembered as the Scouring of Prospero, resulted in the destruction of the libraries of precious knowledge that Magnus and his fellow Thousand Sons held so dear. Mortally wounded by Leman Russ, Magnus fell to temptation as he watched Tizca, the capital city of Prospero, and its famed libraries of ancient knowledge burn, and he called out to the chaos god Tzeentch to save both himself and the remains of his legion. The god of sorcery was only too happy to oblige, and he transported Magnus and the Thousand Sons through the warp to the demon world later known as Planet of the Sorceress. Magnus became a demon prince of Tzeentch, and now desired only vengeance against the Emperor for what he saw as betrayal, never realizing that it was Horus who had truly engineered his downfall and corruption. Beyond the legions, Horus had already swayed Magus Regulus of the Adeptus Mechanicus to his side with the promise of the Standard Template Construct, the STC, a database of ancient technology. This alliance delivered crucial Adeptus Mechanicus and Titan support to the War Master's Traitor Legion and Traitor Imperial Army forces. The Massacre on Isstvan V. Upon the news of the Isstvan III Atrocity, the Emperor dispatched 7 legions: the Iron Hands, the Salamanders, the Raven Guard, the Iron Warriors, the Ward Bearers, Night Lords, and Alpha Legion to face the 4 known traitor legions: the Sons of Horus, the Emperor's Children, the World Eaters, and Death Guard. On the surface of the planet Isstvan V, thousands of drop pods and storm birds were deployed for the initial assault. The first wave was under the overall command of the Primarch Ferrus Manus, and besides his own 10th Legion, the Salamanders led by Vulcan, and the Raven Guard under the command of Corvus Corax. Vulcan's legion assaulted the left flank of the traitors' battle line, while Ferrus Manus charged straight into the center of the enemy lines. Meanwhile, Corax's legion hit the right flank of the enemy's position. The odds were considered equal: 30,000 traitor marines against 40,000 loyalists. Though the Iron Hands, Raven Guard, and Salamanders had managed to make a full combat drop and secured the drop site, they did so at a heavy cost. Overwhelmed with rage, the headstrong Ferrus Manus disregarded the counsel of his brothers Corax and Vulcan, and hurled himself against the fleeing rebels, seeking to bring Fulgrim to personal combat. His veteran troops, comprising the majority of the 10th Legion's Terminators and Dreadnoughts, followed. What had begun as a mass strike against the traitors' position was rapidly turning into one of the largest engagements of the entire Great Crusade. Over 60,000 astartes clashed on the dusky plains of Isstvan V. Horus, War Master of the Imperium, stood watching the destruction while his legions took to the field, and the cheering roar sent up by the loyalists was loud enough to shake the air itself. The second wave of loyalist Space Marine legions descended upon the landing zone. Another 4 Astartes legion arrived on Isstvan V, yet they were no longer loyal to the Emperor. The Night Lords of Konrad Curze, the Iron Warriors of Bertrabo, the Ward Bearers of Loga Aurelian, and the Alpha Legion of Alfarius represented a force larger than that which had first begun the assault on Isstvan V. Corax and Vulcan led their forces back to the drop site to regroup and allow the warriors of the recently arrived brother primarchs of the second wave a measure of the glory in defeating Horus. It was then that Horus revealed his lethal trap. Inside the Black Fortress, where Horus had made his lair, a lone flare shot skyward, exploding in a hellish red glow that lit the battlefield below. The fire of betrayal roared from the barrels of 1,000 guns, as the second wave of astartes revealed where their true loyalties now lay. Ferrus Manus looked on in stunned horror as Fulgrim laughed at the look on his brother's face, as the forces of his allies opened fire upon the Salamanders and Raven Guard, killing hundreds in the fury of the first few moments, hundreds more in the seconds following, as volley after volley of bolt of fire and missiles scythed through the unsuspecting ranks, even as terrifying carnage was being wreaked upon the loyalists below. The retreating forces of the War Master turned and brought their weapons to bear on the enemy's warriors within their midst. Hundreds of World Eaters, sons of Horus, and the Death Guard fell upon the veteran companies of the Iron Hands, and though the warriors of the 10th Legion continued to fight gallantly, they were hopelessly outnumbered, and would soon be hacked to pieces. The Iron Hands had damned themselves by remaining in the field. The Raven Guard were confronted by the Word Bearers. With their Primarch Loga, the two legions fought one another in bitter combat. In the midst of this battle, the two opposing Primarchs Loga and Corax then dueled one another in close combat. Corvus Corax quickly gained the upper hand over Loga, who had always been more of a scholar than a warrior, and Corax prepared to execute him for his betrayal, but was spared from the execution by the Night Lord's Primarch Conrad Kurz at the last moment. The Night Haunter and the Raven fought a brutal melee. Kurz quickly gained the upper hand over his battle-weary brother and prepared to slay him, but Corax managed to escape death by taking to the sky with his master-crafted jump back. Refusing to surrender, the remaining Raven Guard and Salamander's Astartes defended themselves, trying to hold off the inevitable slaughter for as long as possible. Though they suffered a tremendous number of casualties, the Loyalists managed to hold their own, until the Primarch Mortarion of the Death Guard and Angron of the World Eaters joined the fray. The traitors killed tens of thousands of Loyalist Astartes. The Iron Warriors destroyed the first wave's dropships. Despite the odds, some of the Loyalists on the ground managed to escape. The Raven Guard fared better than the Salamanders in escaping the brutal massacre. The fate of these surviving Salamanders or their missing Primarch Vulcan was unknown. The Raven Guard's Primarch Corax just barely managed to board a fleeing Thunderhawk gunship, just to be shot down almost immediately. Corax had survived the crash and regrouped with his warriors and managed to escape aboard the dropships of a rescue force from the Raven Guard's homeworld of Deliverance. They made the dangerous journey through the Immaterium back to Terra to seek audience with the Emperor. Vulcan was missing and Ferrus Manus was beheaded by Fulgrim. The fleets of Angron, Fulgrim, Mortarion, Loga and Horus's own legion would rendezvous at Mars. The Alpha Legion would seek the Space Wolves of Leman Russ and the White Scars of Jagatai Khan and destroy them before they joined forces. The Night Haunter, Conrad Kurz's fleet, departed to tie up the dreaded Lionel Johnson's Dark Angels Legion, so he won't move against Horus before Terra, and the Iron Warriors prepared to move against Rogaldon's The Imperial Fists. We know that Horus sent Rupert Guilliman's Ultramarines to the world of Calth in the Viridian system in the realm of Ultramar to begin a campaign against an Oquwa, and to expect the Word Bearer's Legion as reinforcements. At the same time, Horus sent word to Loga that the time had come to strike against Rupert Guilliman and his Ultramarines, who had humiliated the Word Bearers by destroying the city of Monarchia on the world of Kar at the Emperor's orders during the Great Crusade. The Word Bearers' sudden attack decimated Guilliman's legion fleet, and the Ultramarines' ground troops quickly found themselves outnumbered by their former allies. The Word Bearers slew their loyalist foes in the early stages of their surprise attack and pushed them back over huge territory. Unknown to the traitors, Guilliman's flagship had survived the initial Word Bearers' attack on the Ultramarines' fleet, and Guilliman sent an immediate distress call to Macragge, the capital of the Ultramarines realm of Ultramar. The Ultramarines on Calth soon occupied fortified positions. Guilliman's depleted forces slowed the Wardbearers down long enough for the remainder of the Ultramarines Legion to arrive and rout the traitor Marines from the system. But not before the Wardbearers summoned a massive warp storm called the Rune Storm and managed to cut off Ultramar from the rest of the galaxy and prevent them from reinforcing Terra. Robert Guilliman and large portion of his legion had remained off-world. The Ultramarines received the orders of Malcador the Sigilate, the Emperor's regent, while he was indisposed, pursuing the secret Imperial Webway project and prepared to meet the needs of the Imperium's defenses against the traitor legions. The Shadow Crusade. During the Wardbearers' assault on Calth, Logar and the more reliable Wardbearers under his command launched a joint Shadow Crusade with his brother Angron and his World Eaters Legion into the rest of the realm of Ultramar, decimating the planets of the realm. During this campaign, Logar realized that Angron's mental stability had grown worse. His cybernetic neural implants known as the Butcher's Nails were killing him faster than anyone realized. Logar convinced the Lord of the World Eaters to go back to his homeworld of Nuceria, where the Butcher's Nails were hammered into Angron's skull. The rest of Guilliman's fleet had been tracking the rest of the Wardbearers' Legion after the Battle of Calth and caught up to the traitors upon Angron's homeworld of Nuceria. The Ultramarines' fleet used calculated land strike from safer range. Guilliman guided the battle from the command deck of Courage above all, and had decided that Logar's flagship, Fidelitas Lex, would die first, while the World Eater's flagship, the Conqueror, would be boarded and killed from within. Both traitor legions' flagships fought alone, starved of support and suffering the endless attacks of the 13 Legions Armada. A smaller Ultramarines Legion vessel slipped past the Conqueror's defenses and launched drop pods on the planet's surface, and the first Ultramarines poured forth, bolters raised, moving in perfect unity. Although the World Eaters were waiting for them, they soon realized that these were hardened veterans of the Calth Atrocity. They burned with a cold intensity to carry out the vengeance in their hearts. In the meantime, Guilliman confronted Logar. The two primarchs came together once, power fist against war maul, and backed away from the resulting flare of rebelling energy fields. Their warriors killed each other around them, and neither primarch spared their sons a glance. Guilliman confronted Logar for what his legion had done across the 500 walls of Ultramar. In his righteous anger, the Ultramarines primarch struck Logar with one of his fists, battering the Wardbearer's primarch's sternum. Logar repulsed him with a projected burst of telekinesis, weak and wavering, but enough to send his brother staggering. The Croziers followed, its power field trailing lightning as Logar hammered it into the side of Guilliman's head with the force of a cannonball. Both primarchs faced each other beneath the grey sky, one bleeding internally, the other, with half of his face lost to blood sheeting from a fractured skull. Suddenly Angron burst forth and launched himself at Guilliman, and Guilliman found himself forced back by the storm of Angron's blows. The bearer of the word started chanting in a language never before spoken by any living being. Logar summoned a rune storm to the world of Nuceria, calling for the Neverborn, demons. This was the moment of Angron's apotheosis into demonhood, and became a demon prince of the blood god Khorne. The gravely wounded Guilliman escaped from Nuceria. The World Eaters completed the purge of Nuceria, and now the Shadow Crusade could move on from Ultramar and rejoin Horus for the siege of Terra. Alright guys, I'm gonna end this part here and we'll continue in the second part to find what happened to Sanguinius's Blood Angels, the siege of Terra, the confrontation between Emperor and the Horus, and the ascension of the Emperor. So make sure you're subscribed and stay tuned.